A liturgical book is a book published by the authority of a church that contains the text and directions for the liturgy of its official religious services. Roman Catholic. In the Roman Rite of the Catholic Church, the primary liturgical books are the Roman Missal, which contains the texts of the Mass, and the Roman Breviary, which contains the text of the Liturgy of the Hours. With the 1969 reform of the Roman Missal by Pope Paul VI, now called the ordinary use of the Roman Rite, the scriptural readings were expanded considerably, requiring a separate book, known as the lectionary. The Roman ritual contains the texts of the sacraments other than the Mass, such as baptism, the sacrament of penance, the anointing of the sick, and the sacrament of marriage. The texts for the sacraments and ceremonies only performed by bishops, such as confirmation and holy orders, are contained within the Roman Pontifical. The Ceremonial Episcoporum describes in greater detail than the ordinary liturgical books the ceremonies involved when a bishop presides over the celebration of Mass, the celebration of the Liturgy of the Hours or of the Word of God, particular Masses such as Candlemas, Palm Sunday, the Easter Vigil, the other sacraments, sacramentals, pastoral visitations, etc. The Roman Martyrology gives an account of all the saints commemorated in the Church each day. Other Roman Rite liturgical books include the Roman Gradual and the Gospel Book or Evangeliary. The Catholic Church is composed of 23 autonomous particular churches, the largest of which is the Latin or Western Church. The other 22 churches are collectively called the Eastern Catholic Church, and use a variety of liturgical rites such as the Alexandrian Rite, Antiochian Rite, Armenian Rite, Byzantine Rite, and the East Syrian Rite among others. While the Roman Rite of the Western Church is by far the most common liturgical rite found within the Latin Church, a number of local Western rites and uses also exist. Byzantine Rite. The Rite of Constantinople, observed by the Orthodox Church and those Eastern Catholic churches which follow the Byzantine Rite, represents one of the most highly developed liturgical traditions in Christendom. While the Roman Catholic Liturgy of the Hours may be published in a single-volume breviary, such a feat is hardly possible for the Byzantine Rite, which requires quite a large library of books to chant the daily services. The regular services chanted in the Constantinopolitan liturgical tradition of the canonical hours and the Divine Liturgy. There are, in addition, occasional services and intercessory or devotional services, which are not chanted on a daily basis, but according to need. The fixed portions of the services are called accolaudia, into which the sequences are inserted. The sequences can also be referred to as propers. The sequences are governed by the convergence of several liturgical cycles, including the Paschal cycle and Dominian. Accolaudia. The fixed portions of the services are found in the following liturgical books. Horologion, or Book of Hours, provides the fixed portions of the services as used by the reader and the chanters. For the sake of convenience, some small portions of the sequences are often included as well, such as Feast Day Troparia, Contagia, and those portions which change according to the day of the week. The Horologion may also contain some devotional material such as the prayers before communion, thanksgiving after communion, and morning and evening prayers. Euchologion contains the fixed portions of the services which are said by the priest and deacon, as well as some of the variable portions which the clergy use, such as prokimena and dismissals. The Great Euchologion contains the clergy parts of Vespers, Matins, the three divine liturgies, Compline and Midnight Office, the Lenten hours. It also contains the complete services for the sacred mysteries, funeral, monastic tonsure, consecration of the church, and other occasional services. For convenience, the contents of the Great Euchologion in the Slavic tradition have been divided up as follows. Liturgical contains Vespers, Matins and the three divine liturgies. Asiir contains the parts of services performed by a bishop. Euchologion omits the portions contained in the Liturgicon and Asiir and adds other minor accolaudia sequences into this fixed framework. Numerous movable parts of the service are inserted. These are taken from a variety of liturgical books. Psalter, a book containing the 150 psalms divided into katharsmata together with the biblical canticles which are chanted at matins. The Psalter is used at Vespers and Matins, and normally contains tables for determining which katharsmata are to be read at each service, depending upon the day of the week and the liturgical season of the year. Octoikos, literally, the Book of the 8 Tones, or Modes. This book contains an 8-week cycle, providing texts to be chanted for every day of the week at Vespers, Matins, Compline and the Midnight Office. Each week, the hymns are sung in a different liturgical mode or tone. The origins of this book go back to compositions by St. John Damascene, Menaion, a 12-volume set which provides all liturgical texts for each day of the calendar year. The 12 volumes correspond to the months of the year. The liturgical year begins in September, so the first volume of the Menaion is September. Sticherarion was called a chant book, usually with musical notation. It is subdivided in the stichera for the cycle of the fixed feasts according to the yearly cycle between September and August. The cycle of mobile feast is subdivided into 2 books. The first, called Triadion, contains the stichera sung during Lent and the Holy Week. The second, called Pentecostrion, contains the post-Paschal period between Easter and Pentecost, the weekly cycle after Pentecost until the Sunday of All Saints. Triadion, also called the Lenten Triadion. During Great Lent, the services undergo profound changes. The Lenten Triadion contains propers for the pre-Lenten season, the 40 days of Great Lent itself, Lazarus Saturday and Palm Sunday, Holy Week, Pentecostrion. This volume contains the propers for the period from Pascha to the Sunday of All Saints. This period can be broken down into the following periods: Bright Week, the 7 days from the Pascha through the following Saturday; Paschal season, the period from Thomas Sunday until Ascension and its after feast; Pentecost and its after feast, All Saints Sunday. Synaharion. The Synaharion contains brief lives of the saints for each day of the year, usually read at Matins. Ermologion contains the Ermoi chanted at the canon of Matins and other services. Gospel book containing the Gospel readings that are used at Matins, Divine Liturgy, and other services. Among the Greeks, the Evangelion is laid out in order of the cycle of readings as they occur in the ecclesiastical year, with a section in the back providing the Gospel readings for Matins, feasts and special occasions. In the Slavic usage, the Evangelion contains the 4 Gospels in canonical order with annotations in the margin to indicate the beginning and ending of each reading. Epistle book contains the readings from the epistles and the Acts of the Apostles. It also contains the Procalmenon and Alleluia verses that are chanted with the readings. The Apostol is laid out in the same manner as the Evangelion, depending on whether the book was prepared for the Greek or Slavic usage. Other Typicon, the book which ties all of the above together. It contains all of the rubrics, i.e., the rules for the performance of the divine services, giving directions for every possible combination of the materials from the other liturgical books into the daily cycle of services. Many churches also publish annual liturgical calendars which give detailed instructions from the Typicon which are specific to the concurrence of sequences for the particular year. collections. There are numerous smaller anthologies available, taking portions from the books mentioned above, or from other sources. For instance, the Festal Menaion contains only those portions of the Menaion that have to do with the great feasts, and the General Menaion contains propers for each class of saints, which may be employed when one does not have the propers for the particular saint, etc. There are many different editions of these books which have been published over the years in a variety of liturgical languages. In Greek, the Orthodox books are published at the Phoenix Press. The Uniate books are published by the Congregation for the Oriental Churches. Each national church has further its own editions in its liturgical language. There are also books of all kinds which collect and arrange materials from the list of books above into compendiums by various editors. The Uniate compendiums have a natural tendency to imitate the arrangement of the Roman books. Asiir. The books of the Church of the East Wall in Syriac are the Liturgy, the Gospel, Apostle and Lessons, the Tergama, containing hymns sung by deacons at the Liturgy, the David, Kudra, Kashkol, Kdhamu Wave at Gezet, Abu Halim, Al-Thadin Y. The Baptism Office is generally bound up with the liturgies. The Taxodesiamida has the ordination services. The Taxodusa contains the office for penance. The Athor di Baraka is the marriage service. The Carnita, the burial of clergy. The Anada, that of laymen. Lastly, the Karmis and Wilder are further collections of hymns. Naturally, not every church possesses this varied collection of books. The most necessarily ones are printed by the Anglican missionaries at Urmi for the Nestorian Christians. The Chaldean Catholic books who printed some at Propaganda, some by the Dominicans at Mosul. A Chaldean breviary was published in 3 volumes at Paris in 1886-7. Edited by Père Bedgan, a missionary of the Congregation des Missions. The Malabar Christians deemed heretics by Rome used the traditional books of the Church of the East, and the Uniate Chaldean Catholics have books revised by the Synod of Diamper. The Malabar Catholic Missal was published at Rome in 1774, the Ordo Rituum Electionum in 1775. Coptic. The Coptic books of the Euchologion, very often called Missal. This corresponds to the Byzantine Euchologion. The Coptic equivalent of the Horologion is the Agpere. Then the lectionary called Catamarus, the Synexar, containing legends of saints, the Deacon's Manual and Antiphonary, the Psalter, Theotikia, Doxologia, collections of hymns for the choir and a number of smaller books for the various other offices. The Coptic Orthodox Church has a very sumptuously printed set of the books, edited by Gladios Labib, published at Cairo. These books were first grouped and arranged for the Coptic Catholic Church by Raphael Touki, and printed at Rome in the 18th century. Their arrangement is obviously an imitation of that of the Latin service books. Cyril II, the Uniate Coptic Patriarch, published a Missal, Ritual, and Holy Week book. Ethiopian. The Ethiopian service books are, with the exception of the Eucharistic liturgy, the least known of any. Hardly anything of them has been published, and no one seems yet to have made a systematic investigation of liturgical manuscripts in Abyssinia, since the Ethiopic Geezrite is derived from the Coptic. The books correspond more or less to the Coptic books. Peter the Ethiopian published the liturgy with the baptism service and some blessings at the end of his edition of the Ethiopic New Testament. Various students have published fragments of the rite in Europe, but these can hardly be called service books. Syrian. The Syriac Orthodox and Catholic Syrian liturgical books have never been published as a whole. A fragment of the liturgy was published in Syriac and Latin at Antwerp by Fabricius Boderianus. The Syrian Catholics have a Euchologion, published at Rome in 1843, and a Book of Clerks used in the ecclesiastical ministries. The Divine Office, collected like a breviary, was published at Mosul in 7 volumes. The Ferial Office alone at Rome in 1853, and at Shafi in the Lebanon. A ritual book of ceremony for the Syrian Uniates is issued by the Jesuits at Beirut. Maronite. The Maronites have an abundance of liturgical books for the Divine Liturgy. The Maronite Synod at Deir al-Uwais committed a uniform preparation of all the books to the Patriarch. These books are all referred to in Western or Latin terms. The Missal was published at Rome in 1592 and 1716, since then repeatedly, in whole or in part, at Beirut. Little books containing the ordinary of the liturgy with the anaphora commonly used are issued by many Catholic booksellers at Beirut. The Book of the Minister was published at Rome in 1596 and at Beirut in 1888. The Ferial Office, called Fard burden or duty, was issued at Rome in 1890, at Beirut in 1900. The whole Divine Office began to be published at Rome in 1666, but only 2 volumes of the summer part appeared. A ritual with various additional prayers was issued at Rome in 1839. All Maronite books are in Syriac and Kashuni, Armenian. The Armenian liturgical books are quite definitely drawn up, arranged, and authorized. They are the only other set among Eastern churches whose arrangement can be compared to those of the Byzantines. There are 8 official Armenian service books, the Directory, or calendar, corresponding to the Byzantine Typicon, the Manual of Mysteries of the Sacred Oblation, the Book of Ordinations, are often bound up with the former. The lectionary, the hymn book, the Book of Hours, the Book of Canticles, the Mashdots, or ritual, the books of both the Armenian Apostolic Church and Armenian Catholic Church have been published a great number of times. The latest or Orthodox editions are those of Constantinople and Jerusalem. The Catholic ones have been issued at Rome, Vienna, and especially Venice. There are many extracts from them, especially from the liturgy. Anglican. In the wake of the English Reformation, a reformed liturgy was introduced into the Church of England. The first liturgical book published for general use throughout the Church was the Book of Common Prayer of 1549, edited by Thomas Cranmer, Archbishop of Canterbury. The work of 1549 was the first prayer book to contain the forms of service for daily and Sunday worship in English, and did so within a single volume. It included morning prayer, evening prayer, the Litany, and Holy Communion. The book included the other occasional services in full, the orders for baptism, confirmation, marriage, prayers to be said with the sick, and a funeral service. It set out in full the epistle and gospel readings for the Sunday communion service. Set Old Testament and New Testament readings for daily prayer were specified in tabular format, as were the set psalms and canticles, mostly biblical, that were provided to be sung between the readings. Numerous additions have followed, and currently throughout the Anglican Communion, various books of common prayer are published by the different Anglican provinces. Other official books are published by the member churches for the official use of their churches, such as the lectionary, Book of Occasional Services, etc. Anglo-Catholic. In the late 1800s, as part of the Anglo-Catholic movement, the Anglican Missal was published to provide a particular way, drawn from the Sarum use, of celebrating the Eucharist according to Anglican liturgical tradition. Many Anglo-Catholic parishes use the Anglican Missal, or some variation of it such as the English Missal, for the celebration of the Eucharist. Variations include the Anglican Service Book and a Manual of Anglo-Catholic Devotion, and the Directive Books, a Priest's Handbook by Dennis Michno, and Ceremonies of the Eucharist by Howard E. Galley. All of these books are intended primarily for celebration of the Eucharist. They contain meditations for the presiding celebrant during the liturgy, and other material such as the rite for the blessing of palms on Palm Sunday, propers for special feast days, and instructions for proper ceremonial order. These books are used as a more expansively Catholic context in which to celebrate the liturgical use found in the Book of Common Prayer in related liturgical books. Lutheran Martin Luther was in favor of preserving the Mass of the Church and, other than translating it into the vernacular language of the people, he made very few changes to the liturgy. Over the centuries since the days of the Reformation, the many diverging branches of Lutheran denominations, despite developing a wide swath of differing core beliefs, have maintained and cherished the liturgy in its ancient roots, owing to its widespread diaspora of branches, and especially because of the wide variety of regional languages, customs, and beliefs. There have been many different books of worship prepared and used by congregations worldwide. Besides the formal liturgy itself, Lutheran worship books usually contain the orders for the minor services during the week, such as Vespers, morning prayer, and Compline, along with large sections of hymns, psalms, and prayers and other needed information for the correct following of the liturgical calendar. One particular Lutheran hymnal, used by the moderate, liberal Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, the largest Lutheran denomination in the U.S., is Evangelical Lutheran Worship. The ELW is also used by a few smaller denominations as well, but is mostly frowned upon by more conservative Lutheran bodies, which use their own versions. Methodist John Wesley, the Anglican priest who was a principal leader of the early Methodist revival, wrote that when the Methodists in America were separated from the Church of England because of the American Revolution, John Wesley himself provided a revised version of the Book of Common Prayer called the Sunday Service of the Methodists in North America. Wesley's Sunday service has shaped the official liturgies of the Methodists ever since. For this reason, Methodist liturgy is clearly Anglican in its character, though Methodists have generally allowed for more flexibility and freedom in how the liturgy is celebrated than is typical of Anglican churches. Today, the primary liturgical books of the United Methodist Church are the United Methodist Hymnal and the United Methodist Book of Worship, along with the non-English counterparts. These worship books contain the liturgies of the Church that are generally derived from Wesley's Sunday service and from the 20th century liturgical renewal movement. They also contain the hymnody of the Church, which has always been an important part of Methodist worship. Presbyterian